Now that you've found UBN Radio and discovered our quality talk shows, it's time to spread the word to friends, family, and the universe. 24 hours of music and talk. Radio without limits. That's why people keep coming back for more. That's ubnradio.com.
Welcome to Both Sides Now, featuring the unconventional duo, Dr. Shirley and Medium Kellee White. Two perspectives, one world. This is Both Sides Now.
Okay, good afternoon and welcome to Both Sides Now. I'm Dr. Shirley.
And I'm Medium Kellee White. Whoops.
And John is with us today.
Hello, hello.
Engineer John.
Hi, John.
Sometimes you can see him and sometimes you can't.
And apparently you can see him at different angles.
Depending on...
On both sides.
Right.
On both sides.
now.
I'm on both sides now.
Depending on whether he has a camera on him or not.
Yes.
How many cameras we have.
A lot of times I'm behind the scenes doing so many things. It's hard to have a camera on me while I'm working, but you know, I know people want to see from time to time, so we'll try to make that happen.
His handsome face.
There you go.
I prefer to be behind the scenes, but you know.
Oh my gosh.
So today we're going to talk about depression and anxiety.
Yes.
Two very, very big
Uplifting topics.
Well, uplifting in that, you know, you can do something about it.
You bet.
You're not stuck in your depression or
No.
stuck in your anxiety.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So would you like to start with anxiety today, Cheryl?
So we can. Yeah. So if we talk about anxiety, it is real. Anxiety is an umbrella term, and it has a lot of things that could be underneath, like obsessive compulsive behaviors under anxiety, social phobias under anxiety. There's actually, let me get my old lady shades on. Panic disorder, specific phobias are under anxiety. But they're all, what anxiety is fear. It's an underlying, fear. And that's what anxiety is. To me, I call it the same thing. Anxiety and fear to me is the same word.
Right.
Right?
Oh, I
How
agree.
do you see it?
I agree. Oh, spiritually, we say that there are just two emotions, fear and love. And if you're not in love, you could be in fear.
Yeah.
Anxiety is the fear of the unknown.
Exactly. And, from a psychological standpoint, they also talk about it like it's an existential fear of death.
Oh,
which anxiety.
absolutely. Well, when we talk about an existential fear of death, I actually work with death. Often I'm a medium. I work with people on the other side. And once I can go and work with somebody to help them understand that there's no such thing as death. I mean, we leave the body, but there's no such thing as the soul continues. The soul goes on. It seems to help a lot with anxiety.
It really does. And that's what I think is so healing about it, especially when you're giving messages and you're hitting things that, that they would never know.
Oh, yeah.
And even if I'm in the room, if I'm working with someone and they want you to join us on a session, things that I don't even know that they haven't told me, and you're hitting it. And so it really gives credence to that and can really help someone decrease their anxiety.
Oh, absolutely. But that's a big one, fear of death. Fear of public speaking causes great anxiety.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's number one. I think it's bigger than death.
But the truth is, it's so funny because I always used to laugh about, the existential fear of death, It's like I've never feared death. But ultimately, if you break down all these fears, it is about death. And that's, from a neurobiology standpoint, is the primitive part of the brain. If we didn't have that big fear, our species would not have survived. So the brain does it that way. For example, fear of public speaking is I'm going to say something, they're going to hate me, and they're going to shun me from their group. And if I'm alone out there in the jungle, and the tiger can spot me because I only have my eyes to spot the tiger. But if I'm in a group, I've got thousands of eyes to spot the tiger. So my chances to survive are much higher.
That's very interesting because when people are anxious, they often need somebody to help calm them down.
Right. Well, and if you break it down, always to the most, it's almost always, if not always, a fear of death. And so that's the primitive part of the brain also at work, in addition to the existential kind of fear of death. If we didn't have that, if we weren't so attuned to that, from what the neurobiologists say, is our species probably, because she probably wouldn't have continued, because we'd be walking down and, look at the tiger, who cares? Who cares? But we would have died.
Right.
So it is about that. And, they do say that there's a genetic component to it. So you may be, if you come from a line of people.
Anxious people.
Yeah. you may have a predisposition in your brain for it, but there's this incredible study in the last 10 years of epigenetics.
What is epigenetics?
Epigenetics is a study that has come out where how your environment can actually can actually turn on genes or not.
Give me an example of that.
So, for example, if you have a predisposition for anxiety, but your environment, for whatever reason, your parents both went to therapy and they were at a very healthy place before they had you, and your environment at home was felt very safe and very comforting and very soothing and very attuned, then you won't get anxious, even if you have a predisposition.
Wow.
Your environment can either turn on the gene or keep it dormant.
So that would that
basically
be
in layman's terms.
Okay, so nature versus nurture?
Exactly. They're finding out that it's a lot more nurture than nature.
So does that mean that if your needs aren't being met, if you were left alone, would that, as a baby, would that begin the anxiety trail?
Oh, absolutely. It's all about safety, especially as an infant and a child in your environment. It's all about safety. And safety has to do with also how attuned my parents are to me. Because, and again, it's not, about blaming. But if my parent can't kind of get into what I may need and they only give me what they think I need or what they need and they didn't get, and they're projecting that onto me, my needs are never met. And so I feel like, oh my God, no one's going to meet my needs. No one's going to meet my needs. I'm going to die because the people that are supposed to take care of me aren't meeting my needs.
And that is exactly what high anxiety feels like. You feel like you're going to die.
Exactly. And as a baby, you could have possibly died. I mean, that's a real fear. As an adult, we need to kind of take a look at it. Am I looking at worlds through my child perspective or through my adult perspective? Yeah. And how can I help shift that? So even though it feels like I'm going to die, I know I'm not going to die. And that helps you kind of gain a little bit of control.
So what would a technique look like? Like as soon as you said that, I thought like deep breathing to calm yourself down. Would that help?
There's a lot of wonderful somatic techniques, meaning body techniques, to help calm down. And one of them is grounding. So, for example, noticing your feet on the ground, noticing your butt in the chair, looking around the room and kind of seeing the different colors. When someone's really having a lot of anxiety, pick out 10 pink things, and so your brain has to think about, is that pink? Is that pink?
So it gives your brain a place to go.
Well, it gives this part, the front part of your brain, which is the thinking brain, it re-engages the thinking part of your brain because otherwise the anxiety is coming from the limbic area, which is in the middle, and it's all emotional. And when we get extremely anxious, the thinking part literally goes offline. And we're just in the anxiety, and up pops a panic attack possibly.
Right.
So we need to keep the thinking part engaged. So, for example, what I teach people to do when they're driving, if they start to feel anxious, read street signs, read restaurant signs.
Oh, that's a fabulous one.
Yeah, look at license plates and read it out loud. 1, N, 4, 2, because that will always engage the thinking part of your brain.
Okay, that's great. And when I work with my people, I'll say, think of, if you can, think of a safe place. A safe place, of the beach, of your dog.
Yeah.
The dogs actually seem to be able to calm people down.
That's a wonderful thing. We call that in somatic experiencing, we call those resources, which means that when you think about them, you calm down. And that's because the primitive part of the brain doesn't know the difference between real or imagined. So if you imagine being with your dog, you can actually start to feel calm. And your body's not, you're not doing it. It's involuntary that your body starts to calm down.
Right, right.
I teach people who have a fear of airplanes.
How do you work with that?
The minute they sit on the airplane, they buy the most boringest magazine. Because it can't be a magazine that excites you, because excitement and anxiety run on the sympathetic nervous system, so it's the same nervous system.
Okay.
So you buy a boring magazine. For me, it's computers, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
So I will buy, so you buy a computer magazine, and the minute you sit on the airplane, you start reading it. You're engaging the thinking part. Even if you don't know what you're reading, to form the words uses this part of your brain. So you will at least stay at a decreased anxiety. It's not going to take your anxiety away, but you won't get overpowered by your anxiety.
That's so interesting, because the way I would have looked at that is if I get on a plane, and I don't have a fear of it, but
me neither.
But my thought is I'd get on the plane and I would bring a magazine that's really engaging so that I could be so hyper-focused that I wouldn't even realize that the plane was going off or not going off.
It could be both. Engaging and interesting is different than exciting.
Okay.
So you just want to make sure it's not exciting because it'll still run on the sympathetic nervous system.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So either boring or engaging and interesting, but not exciting.
But nothing too exciting.
Yeah.
How do you deal with, say, have you had this, phobia of spiders? Which, I mean, I'll tell you what, I see a spider and I literally do a backflip. There was I don't know if you saw this in the paper the other day, like people read the paper anymore, but in the, I
still do.
But in the whatever, I saw this, maybe on Facebook, probably. There was a woman that was driving, and as she was driving, and her baby was in the back seat of the car. Did you see this?
No.
She's driving, and then she sees a spider in her car.
Uh-huh.
And she so panics that she runs out of the car while the car is still driving.
With the baby
in the back
in
seat.
it?
Yes. Oh, yes. Now,
and what
that's a
happened?
horrible story. I got to tell you, I would hope to God that I would do the right thing and not run out the door. She ended up hitting something. The baby was okay. The baby. It's the only reason I can even talk about it. The baby
God.
was okay. It was fine, actually. And I think the car ran into something. It stopped her.
Well, interestingly enough about that, I don't know much about it because I don't work with specific phobias like that. But they say that systematic desensitization works with those. So, for example, first, depending on how big your fear is. So, first of all, you would bring like a picture. And you would help regulate the person. You would notice, I would say, okay, here's a picture of a spider, in the corner of, far away, right?
Right.
And notice, is your heart beating? Yes. Then you would regulate them. Then maybe you would bring it closer and closer until eventually you bring a real spider in, in a box. And, and you would do it like that. And so what happens to the nervous system is when you realize that you're not, because what you think is that when the nervous system peaks, that you're going to die. And interestingly enough, we have a breaker, just like the electrical system has a breaker. It can't go up in perpetuity. There's a breaker and it stops it, and then you'll come down. In fact, I said that to one person who had panic attacks, and he goes, ever since you told me that, I never had a panic attack again.
That is such a good piece to
that
know.
Fear was not there anymore.
In other words, you can't just explode.
Right, you're right. Your head's not going to explode if your anxiety goes.
I don't know.
Our bodies have a natural breaker point.
That is
Breaker
amazing.
system.
What a good tip to know.
Yeah. But I have to tell you, and call me a hypocrite. That's fine. I have a panic paranoid fear of snakes, and I don't want to have to go through what it takes to get rid of that because I know that I'd have to get near a snake, and I have no interest. I guess if I lived in the jungle, maybe I would because I'd see them all the time.
That could be actually from a past life.
But my
that
fear,
deep kind
I
of
went,
a fear
and
of
why
snakes.
I go hiking, I have no idea because I guess I'm,
Yeah. We were hiking in Runyon Canyon. I was with two girlfriends, and this is not that long ago. And we were up there, Runyon Canyon. Now, of course, I've not been back since. Yeah. But we were walking, and we heard this noise, like a, little rattle, like a little shaking thing. And I was with my girlfriend, Shirley, who I do love, but, real clueless. And the other gal and I were like this. But we both apparently systematically had the same response, which was like that, of the snake. And then we see the snake. We both stop. Shirley just keeps walking, didn't hear it and didn't see it. Both of us were so panicked that we couldn't say, grab her and stop her.
Right.
I mean, that was real fear, I have to say.
Well, but that's just it. I go hiking too. Why I go? I must be silly or something because one time I was at Fryman Canyon.
Okay.
And a thin snake, just went through my path. I started crying hysterically and panicking, like, and of course the snake had already left, and people were walking, hiking, walking up, and I'm having this like panic, crying, and it was a snake because I'm trying to tell them why I'm, panicking, and I couldn't, and I did, I followed my. My rules. I said, okay, ground yourself. It's okay.
You did.
Snake. And I kept walking. Notice your feet on the ground, and that's what calmed me down. But
so you really went into
like
that place.
I never panic in my life.
Wow.
And let me tell you how sick I truly am, because at the zoo, besides the first place is the monkeys, of course, I'll go to the snakes and I'll watch them as long as they're behind the glass. I'm fascinated and I watch them. But if God forbid they would bring one out, I would pass out. I literally would almost faint. I was working with this family in their home, and I did not know they had a huge boa. And I was standing. This is actually a story in my book, and it was real. she walks out. She's maybe, I don't know. I'm at the curb and the house is in. She walks out the front door with the boa around her neck, and I look at it and I start to panic, and I feel my knees almost give out, and I almost faint. And of course, my left brain kicked in and said, "You cannot faint." So I start walking. Walk away. Notice your feet. Walk away. And I talk myself out until I can't see it. And then I told one of the producers, "Tell her to please put the snake away. I can't." But if it's in a glass,
that's
I'm
interesting.
fine. But they pull it out, and I can faint.
So what about on a picture?
Oh, picture's fine.
That's
I had
fine.
snakes all over my bed when I was a kid.
What?
Yeah, pictures of snakes. I know. Let's not. This show is not about analyzing me today.
So many messages, though. It's very interesting because the show's taking on a life of its own.
I
in this
know,
sense,
right?
because
We were talking about anxiety.
anxiety
so
and
never
depression.
mind.
Now we've gone into fears and panic,
and
which is funny because Halloween, so it's a perfect time.
That's
Exactly.
right.
Well, also, but snakes also represent Kundalini energy, rising,
right, which is
too,
sexuality
which is
and
sexuality
creativity
and
and
vital
creativity.
life
Yeah.
force.
Well, and that's what I've learned from you. And so when I dream about a snake, I don't get that afraid. I try to view
No.
it from that way. But it's always been, it's the weirdest thing. And I'm not interested in going through. And here I'm saying that I know we have a breaker point. I know all of that.
Well,
and I'm
it's interesting you said breaker point because you said you're about to faint. Is that the breaker point?
That can be the
good
breaker
point.
point sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah.
fainting.
Well, not in a panic attack. A panic attack is when you feel so much, when it's going up like that.
And you can't control it.
And you can't control it. And so then it'll eventually stop.
Yeah.
Fainting is more that something is scaring you. And so it just kind of, it's like an overwhelming.
So panic is scary, though.
Panic is scary. I had a full-blown panic attack once. I was about 21 or 22, and I had to leave my mom. I was going on a ship for about 3 or 4 months, semester at sea, and I had to leave my mom. And I had such a panic attack. I felt all of a sudden from my toes all the way straight up, I felt this numbing. What's happening? And next thing I know, it came all the way up, and I couldn't talk.
Wow.
And my eyes went like this, and I couldn't see. I mean, and then my sister was there. My sister said, "Oh, look at Kellee." And I was like this, like this, It was a full-blown panic attack. Scared me to death. And my mom said, "Put a bag over her head." Wow. And that's another thing that people do. They put a bag over themselves. But
over the head, or they breathe in a bag?
You know what? They put the bag on my head.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I've heard that they do.
I think that's...
Yeah, so you breathe in the bag or you
Maybe it
have
was
the
my
bag on your
sister.
head. That's interesting, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's to help you kind of regulate as well.
Yeah.
But regulating your nervous system, which is what I did in both incidences, even with the spear panic, is grounding yourself. Okay, start walking. Notice your feet. Notice the atmosphere around you. Count the trees if you're outside or something like that. That will engage.
That's a very
the thinking
good
part
one.
of your. But it is about fear, and so a lot of it has to do. You may not have a specific memory as a child about something fearful, but it could be that your just whole environment. Your environment as a child didn't feel safe.
Well, that's so interesting. You grew up with snakes on your bed. You fear the snakes. I mean, that's just so many different things going on. That it's like, what? And then Kellee brought up the fact that it could be past life related.
It might be, but talking about sexuality, it might be that too. I mean, I was brought up in a household that the Catholics, where it's the worst thing ever.
Could be.
Sexuality is the worst thing
Well,
ever.
then that gorilla that was chasing you that represented sexuality we talked about in the show, another show. So
So,
could
oh my God!
possibly
So I
be.
was all messed up about sex and didn't know it.
Well, that could have been that
You
Catholic
mean it have to
thing.
do with sex?
Could
sex
be.
is related to creativity too,
Well,
which
it
is the right brain,
and
right?
it also goes back to what I always say: the Kundalini energy, your vital life force. So sexuality is part of your vital life force. So you're young, and you've got snakes all around. I mean, it could be that your anxiety, actually, when your vital life force is squished, I mean, all the way down, that's depression. But I always feel that anxiety is trying to fight to stay alive, also on some level.
Well, under the depression,
Under the
right? I mean,
depression.
depression can be, anger turned inward,
Right.
or when you feel this helplessness.
Yeah.
And I think, without getting too much into my child, I had I remember we talked a few shows ago also about the great white, and dreams and totems.
great
and stuff.
white shark.
And I had a huge poster of a great white and a rattlesnake where the head was like this. And I think I felt so powerless.
Oh, yeah.
And so those were images, I think, in my room to help me feel powerful.
Power.
And when
Absolutely.
see some clients who have deadly snakes or are interested in that kind of thing. It's that's where they get their power from. I
Makes
have
them feel powerful.
It makes them feel powerful if they don't feel it inside. Exactly. So it's it could be related to that. But let's talk a little bit about also depression.
Depression.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, there's different types of depression. And let me get my little glasses on for this too. Of course, there's the big one, which is a major depressive disorder. They've changed it in the DSM-5. So some of the symptoms that you would have from the major depression or major depressive disorder would be depressed mood or irritable, and that could be most of the day or nearly every day. A decreased interest or pleasure in any activity or most activities. That's like a big one. Significant weight change. That can be a gain or a loss.
Right. Weight loss or weight gain.
Change in sleep. All of a sudden you might have insomnia or hypersomnia.
Or you're sleeping too much.
Sleeping too much.
Yeah.
The change in activity. You might, with a change in an activity, you might suffer from psychomotor agitation, or they call it slow retardation, where the body
psychomotor
is
retardation, right? Where you see people
like
really
that.
slow, moving slow or talking slow.
Talking slow. Fatigue or loss of energy. That's a big one. Fatigue.
Yeah.
You see somebody who's tired all the time.
Yeah.
There might be something going on there. Guilt or worthlessness. Feeling inappropriate guilt.
Yeah.
Concentration. People that have difficult time concentrating.
Concentration. Yeah.
Hard time making a decision. Suicidality.
Yeah.
Now, when we've got that one, thoughts of death or suicide, or they have a suicide plan.
It's interesting to note, and I learned this from one of my supervisors back then when I was getting my my hours, is when someone is very depressed, they don't have the energy to commit suicide. Sometimes as they start to pop out of the depression, when there's a little bit more energy, that's when you'll see someone who is suicidal actually attempt it.
Wow.
Yeah. So you have to be careful with that.
sure do.
When someone is coming
Starting
out
to
of their
feel better?
depression, if they've talked about, because not everybody who's depressed talks about suicide.
Right.
But if they have, don't think that because they're coming out of the depression that the risk is over,
point.
because that's when the energy shows up enough to possibly
Interesting.
do it. Yeah.
Very interesting. And as far as the way spiritually, the way I look at depression is, again, I go back to the Kundalini energy. That somehow it's that vital life force is just so low. It's been so damaged or pushed down, is a better word. And so when you start to feel better, the energy starts to rise. And there are a lot of ways to feel better. Of course, you can take medication if it's really bad.
Yeah.
That is something to do it. There are also fabulous homeopathic remedies that can help do it, but also exercise, getting the endorphins going
In your brain.
and knowing. And what I try to work with people is that they have a future. The future can be bright. It's not all. We're not here to suffer.
Yeah.
We're not really here to suffer.
Yeah.
And a lot of times that's what they want, is they just want the pain to end. They don't want their life to end.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
Exactly. It's
point.
getting rid of the pain. That is so true. What I find a lot is people who have a lot of anxiety or are very depressed, underneath it is untapped anger.
Oh, yes.
When people are so afraid to get angry or don't even realize there's anger underneath that. And that is the life, energy, even though it's an emotion that people are so afraid of, I've learned that anger is that life energy.
It's life force. You bet.
It's life
It can
force.
be. You bet.
And we had a show about emotions, but I want to repeat, it's not about the emotion, it's how we react to that emotion that we're afraid of or that gets us into trouble, or we attach anger with the reaction of anger, and the two are very separate. But
Tell
when
us
we
a little
grew
bit
up,
more about that.
Well, when we grew up with, a very angry father, an angry mother, that used to yell a lot and stuff like that, we associate anger with that action, and so then we're very afraid of anger. And we don't want to feel anger. But the two are very separate. It just means that you had, unfortunately, a parent who had no control over their anger, and so, so the two then became associated. But I can feel angry and not react to it.
Right.
I can feel angry and then decide, how do I want to react to this? Can I confront you and tell you why I'm angry? Can I decide not to do anything because it's not worth it? Can I, so the two are different. We need to uncouple anger from the reaction of anger. And I think people will be much more
And when that happens, does the
feel safer
depression lift?
Yes. And the anxiety too. I mean, I
bet.
had someone who was extremely anxious and got in touch with some anger and all of a sudden said, it's so weird. I feel so much anger, but I feel relieved. And it's like a release, and I actually feel calmer. So they were feeling angry but calmer from the anxiety.
Yes.
And it's, if we look at kind of the source of it, it's when a parent doesn't attune to our needs, even as infants, people really don't realize that infants have memory. People don't think that babies have memories, but an infant would never be able to recognize their parent's face if there wasn't a storage of memory to memorize the face. Otherwise, a baby could go with anybody.
Right.
So infants do have memory. It's implicit memory. They don't have the language for it, but it's, what we might call unconscious memory or non-conscious memory. When a parent doesn't attune to our needs, it makes us angry. I'm hungry, and you're not getting that I'm hungry.
So then, would that be then the depression? Would that be the infant just giving up?
Well, exactly. And so initially it's an anger. So you see it in babies. When the baby starts crying a little bit, and then they start crying a lot. Well, that's the anger coming out. Right. And then all of a sudden, if the parent still doesn't come, the baby stops crying. That's the, okay, no one's coming. I have to preserve my energy, so I might as well,
And then after
stop.
that would happen over and over
If that happens,
over.
there's a learned helplessness and all that stuff, A lot of times for anxiety is a parent sometimes comes, sometimes doesn't, sometimes comes, sometimes doesn't. So then the baby's crying and doesn't know if the parent's going to come. And so then there's this kind of, is he coming? Is he not coming? Is she coming? Is she not coming?
Right.
Kind of thing. But nonetheless, if my needs aren't attuned to, my natural reaction is anger, right? Just like any mammal. You come at your dog, initially the dog growls at you. That's anger, right? But it's too scary to feel angry because these are the people that are supposed to keep me alive. So at some level, we know that, and so we suppress the anger.
And when it gets suppressed,
then
it gets into depression.
Up pops maybe depression or up pops anxiety. And so I've seen so many times when I help someone work, first you need to, people feel so bad. Well, but I love my mom. How can I be angry at her? Well, you can have both.
Right.
You can love somebody dearly and also be angry at some of the things that they missed.
Oh, and speaking of that, and as a medium, when I've had parents that have passed over that have come to me, often they'll apologize for the behavior or whatever it happens to be, and I find that helps also lift either the anger or the anxiety or the depression. A lot of times it helps with the depression.
And that's why I value your gift so much and your craft, because it can help heal so much, just like someone in a therapist can with that, because it does heal that. Because once you get that, you can start to work and you can start to feel okay with feeling angry. Once you work through that, then you can.
Yeah, I was going to say, the technique, it's called empty chair. The empty chair? It's a Gestalt technique where the person, is in the therapy chair and then they have an empty chair there. And let's say they're upset with, the depression is over or anxiety is over the mother or the father. And they can put them there, whether they're alive or not, put them, psychologically in that chair and start really having a dialogue with them in that chair. And what I find spiritually is if the person has passed, that person is actually sitting in that chair.
Yeah. Oh,
it's very important.
Yeah. Yeah. Because, unless it was not intentional, it was either, they didn't know or they're just, on autopilot, and didn't know any better and stuff.
It's often the case.
Oh, it's most always the case, unless you're a sadistic fuck.
But then we can't say it's always the case because of that. That is a component, actually.
There is a component.
There are some parents that just frankly shouldn't have been parents.
Yeah. Right. Well, there's, a reason for everything, I suppose.
That's right. That's right. I don't want to get you triggered on that. I forgot about
Don't
that.
get me triggered on that. Not being parent. Oh, my God.
Oh, my gosh.
You didn't watch that show? Don't watch it.
Yeah.
But so I mean, unless you're sadistic and you're really doing this to your child and you're thinking about what you're doing, but for the most part, parents, it's not intentional. So the anger is to help you resolve it. And a lot of people want to jump to that step of, I want to accept my parents for who they are as human beings. And that's, of course, the goal. But a lot of people jump to that step and don't go through the anger. And I think it's these kind of people that I see kind of are up there without any grounding, especially in the spiritual world. You know, you walk in and everything is airy fairy.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God. And I can tell that they're floating up here and hanging on by a string because they haven't done the work that it takes to be grounded in your, you know, evolvement and in your, you know, mental health and spirituality.
And sometimes depression can be that you're stuck. You're stuck without moving forward. And your resistance to change, I find, is a lot of the time is the result of suffering. So you're suffering because you're resisting change. And then that can lead to you being depressed because you're too fearful to make that leap, to take a step into the next, you know.
Right.
Most definitely. I mean, fear can stop you from, you know, and if you've only felt anxiety your whole life, sometimes when I get people to the place where they actually feel calm, you know, it's something that we call relaxation-induced anxiety, where the calmness throws you into anxiety because you've never felt it before.
I've felt that myself.
You know,
So you're too calm almost?
Not too calm. You've just never felt it before.
Right.
You know, and the brain doesn't like the unknown because it can't prepare.
You're used to everything going wrong, or you're used to suffering. And so when you finally are out of that, you feel very uncomfortable. I've experienced that. And I've actually thought that was PTSD, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, it could be a
Could
component
be.
of PTSD, but people don't understand because we're so conditioned to everyone wants to be happy and wants to feel good that we don't realize, well, if you've never felt that, you have to increase your tolerance for it and increase your container for it. It doesn't just show up and then you're fine. You know, because if you've never felt it, to the brain it feels scary because I've never felt this thing. You know, I've never felt calm, or I've never felt, you know, where I don't have to expect the worst showing up. So you have to, it's little by little, you have to increase your tolerance for that so you can then expand it and be okay with calmness.
Right. And I would say with that part, it reminds me of meditation, actually, because even with meditation, you can start off slowly, and that is very calming. Meditation is a very calming thing.
Yeah.
And it gets you, you don't have to run and do. It's just a stillness.
Yeah.
And some people are very uncomfortable with that.
Yeah, well, I would
with
suggest
being alone with that for a few minutes even.
Right. So for people who are very anxious, who are very not in tune with their body, I would suggest a guided meditation first. So your mind is, you know, listening to someone else.
Gives a
as
place for your
opposed
brain to go.
Yeah, because otherwise it can be very scary too, and then people won't want to meditate anymore. You know, I mean, I'm sure you've had people that have a lot of anxiety, and they, well, if the anxiety isn't there, there's going to be a void. What's going to be there?
Right. What is going to be there?
So
I
that's huge
always
too.
work with them for that void is to fill that up with spirituality.
Yeah.
And what do I mean by that? Getting in touch with yourself, having a dialogue with your spirit guides. So how would that look? What would that look like? You'd start in meditation, and you may think that you're hallucinating. Doesn't really matter. Just start, all right, spirit guide, come to me and start having a dialogue. I mean, use your imagination for that.
Yeah.
Start to enjoy that process.
Right.
And that actually kind of fills that up of that extra space of, oh no, I've got to be anxious or depressed or one of the two, and actually you don't.
Yeah, well, that's
be
what,
free
you know,
from all of
people
it.
who don't understand it or have never felt it think, well, you know, if you're not anxious, that's great. Well, again, if you've only felt anxiety,
Gosh,
you will feel like, well, then what's going to be there if anxiety isn't? And it can feel like a void, and that's very real, and it's so important to work with that,
It's like the calm before the storm.
you know?
So does it mean like a perpetual waiting?
Well, the feeling for me is like a calm before the storm, like you're wondering when the next thing's going to happen. Like this calmness
Exactly.
can't be like, you know, it lasts for an extended period of time because you're expecting the storm. So
Well, and that's, you know, and again, you know, I'm glad that you're saying that because the brain can make so many associations. I mean, it's an association organ, you know? So every time I feel calm, something happens. So then, you know, like one, you know, that's kind of magical thinking. Like one is
Right.
because of the other. And I, you know, in my work with people, it's like, no, they stand alone. Yes, something's going to happen because eventually something will because shit happens in life. But that doesn't take away from the calm you felt in this moment. And it doesn't mean that this calm caused that thing to happen.
And it doesn't mean
know?
that whatever that thing is that would happen or not happen doesn't mean that you can't deal with it.
Well, exactly. And that's where you differentiate when you come from the child perspective or the adult perspective. You know, the child was too afraid because it couldn't help itself. And as a child, a lot of times you can't. The adult can.
and I was going to say the
So-
calm before the storm before the ambulance arrives,
Right.
and
Before
then
the
there's another
arrived.
ambulance.
Yeah. So,
You missed the last show. That's what it was about.
yeah.
One of the shows.
So, yeah, if anyone wants to know about the ambulance story, it was in our dream show.
Yeah.
Dreams and Totems. So yeah, it's so important to not be upset at yourself if different things come up, because there's so many different kind of layers that can be associated with if you come from depression or anxiety.
What about social anxiety? Because I know that's a particular anxiety.
Oh, it sure is. I find a lot of my people actually have social anxiety.
Yeah.
Again, a lot of people that I know for social anxiety,
Impasse.
well, they're on medication.
Well, I feel a lot of
It
times.
seems to help.
Well, I agree with you, and I think a lot of times with social anxiety could be related to being an empath from the spiritual point.
Oh.
Because you're feeling everybody else's stuff going on around you.
It could be. It's not been my experience with it.
But for me, I think that's what it is, and my mom especially. I think it's you're concerned about what people are thinking about you, but you're still feeling their energy because they're thinking about other people being, everyone's always worried about being judged when they're in a room. Don't you think that? I mean,
yeah.
That's part of the social
yeah.
anxiety.
That's part. Yeah, it's that public speaking. Public speaking is the number one fear.
Right.
Death is second, but interestingly enough, that public speaking is about death. Ultimately, if you break it down, like we talked moments ago. So it is. It's about being ridiculed.
Ridiculed,
and
judged,
and shamed and humiliated. So if you come from a lot of that, probably public speaking is not going to feel that good.
No,
Right.
I can imagine.
Right.
So that's what it comes. And the reality is, I'm for medications if it's going to help you. There's beta blockers which regulate your heartbeat. That's all they do. And a lot of people take that before doing a public speech because it helps regulate the heart. And what happens with that, I think that's okay in the sense where if then you see, oh, wow, I got through it and I was okay, maybe the next time you don't have to take one. Or maybe, you do it for 3 times and the 4th time you don't because now you realize, wow, I got through this.
You had a good experience,
exactly.
possibly.
So now you're making
reframing.
Exactly. You're reframing, you're making different associations.
Right.
Yeah. It's all, it's about understanding. And if you come at things with curiosity instead of judgment,
So true.
you can really open it up to just be curious. Okay, why do I feel this way? I'm curious about why I reacted that way, or I'm curious about why.
And that slows it down.
Yeah.
Instead of just jumping on board.
Right. There's so many times what gets me really upset is, especially with kids, they want to fix the behavior. And they're not curious about what's causing the behavior. Even kids that seem depressed or kids that are anxious, and they want to, get rid of the behavior, But what's causing it? Your child wasn't born that way.
Yeah.
So let's be more curious about what's causing the behavior, and the behavior in and of itself will dissipate on its own if you get to the root of it. And I work with my patients like that too when they come in with a lot of anxiety and depression. I don't even addictions. I don't, and I'm not an addiction specialist, but when someone comes in and they're addicted to something, I don't worry about the addiction, because if I try and tell them not to do it, then I'm setting them up for more, to judge themselves even more. I work with what's underneath, because any addiction is to stop us from feeling something. So let's figure out what that is.
And that could be anxiety underneath that.
Yeah, it's anxiety, but what's underneath the anxiety? And it all goes down to childhood. I mean, it really does. And not just your parents, the environment. I'm working with someone who has huge anxiety, and it was all about bullying, because she was bullied every single year of her elementary and high school.
Jeez.
So you can imagine with that. And the parents didn't really know how to help her with it.
Wow.
So that caused a huge amount of anxiety. So I'm not just saying the parents. I'm saying it's the whole environment. Of course, for the first few years, you're almost always just with parents or with babysitters, and that. But it's really important to take a look at that, because the brain starts to form from 0 to 5. And so the brain is forming. If someone is highly anxious, to me, that tells me that they must have felt afraid between that time, because their amygdala, which is the threat detector of the brain, is overactive. And it works too much. A brain without any kind of depression or anxiety, the amygdala is scanning for danger every 5 seconds without our knowledge of it.
Wow.
So imagine someone that was brought up, like, people that came from like war-torn countries, their amygdala is,
Constantly scanning.
On high
constantly
alert,
scanning on
constantly.
high alert all the time.
Yeah.
So I always kind of go visit the past to see where that came from, so then we can start to help heal that and heal those wounds. And the anxiety decreases and addictions decrease. I mean, it's fascinating when you look at it from that standpoint.
Wouldn't that be PTSD? I really need
would
the
think so.
definition of what this PTSD is, because I think it could be more than just being in a war zone, right? It could be just constant
PTSD
abuse or something.
PTSD is a
it's a trauma that has occurred.
It's a trauma that's occurred, and so you have flashbacks. I mean, maybe we can look it up to see exactly what the characteristics are. But it's flashbacks. It's
And you have night terrors.
night terrors.
or
You can't.
night problems.
You have a hard time kind of going around the area of where it happened. If it's an accident or if it's you can have PTSD because you grew up in a war-torn country. Because, so then all the time you heard the bombs going off and that kind of stuff.
Upsetting dreams even is a part of it as well.
Exactly. So,
And avoidance.
a lot of anxiety isn't always PTSD.
Okay.
PTSD can have anxiety in it.
See, that's interesting.
part of it,
Yeah,
yeah.
because usually I think anxiety a lot of times comes from trauma, at least in my perspective.
Anxiety.
Well, it can.
Yeah.
There's different sources, but there's something. It's a feeling of unsafeness, of unsafety, and that's what, at the bottom line, that's what that anxiety is about. Fear, and fear is about feeling unsafe, because it's all about survival.
Absolutely.
It is all about survival, and so if you didn't feel safe, that's going to kind of rock that foundation of of feeling grounded.
And I think that, and there's a general anxiety disorder too, which is, it's almost more prevalent, where it's an anxiety that it's a lot of people I notice have that. It's that everything kind of makes them anxious.
Yeah. And so again, if there isn't something specific, then I always kind of start to be curious about that. Okay, why is this person anxious? Right. We'll talk about what's going on in their life now and stuff. And so if, again, you come at it with curiosity, then all of a sudden the questions that you would ask just kind of form in your mind because you come at it with curiosity. So then I'll ask questions about childhood, and I'll ask questions. And sometimes, I have to say quite rarely, but there have been times where I can't pinpoint to anything. And it could be because they're not remembering something.
Could be.
Or they've dissociated it or something. So we just deal with the anxiety, in the here and now, which is the way to deal with it anyways. There's also, and I heard that they took it out of the DSM-5, is the stymic disorder, which used to be kind of like this low-grade depression, ongoing low-grade depression.
They took it out?
They took it out. Yeah.
So there's no dysthymia anymore?
No.
What do they call it then?
I don't know if they have a low-grade depression. I have to take,
Yeah.
I'll admit, I haven't taken my DSM-5
I didn't mean to
class
put you on
yet.
this. I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but
Thank you, John, for
There's
putting me on
Well,
the spot.
no, because I have. That's what I was diagnosed with. That was one of my diagnoses.
Dysthymia.
Was dysthymia.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I mean, I don't work with insurance and stuff, so I don't really need to know diagnoses that much. But I'm curious because, that is very true. It's a low-grade level anxiety that kind of you just feel kind of all the time.
All the time.
Yeah, all the time. Yeah.
We would call those in the somatic experiencing world people who are kind of hypo. When you, like you were talking about, when you don't feel safe or when you've been abused or something like that, you eventually, some people go hyper, and so they go to the anxiety level. Some people go into the depression, which is the hypo. So your nervous system, you're kind of just like this, like you're almost frozen a little bit. There's like this helplessness, or there's this lower grade, like wake up. I mean, I wonder if from a spiritual standpoint, it's people who aren't fully awake.
Well, for me, from a spiritual standpoint, it always goes to the vital life force is just not wanting to come up.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, it just kind of is like this.
And I found your answer for the new dysthymia diagnosis.
Oh, what is it?
It's now called PDD, which is persistent depressive disorder.
Okay, so that's what dysthymia meant.
Okay.
So they just kind of
Very
spelled it out
good.
for us. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, and that's it. If you have a kid whose needs are never met, as a kid, they just might go, okay, my needs are never met. So it's like the Eeyore.
Yeah.
Yes.
Eeyore.
It's like
Eeyore's
Eeyore.
a good one. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
so it's really an important thing to kind of explore, and because you don't have to live that way.
You do not have to
really
live
don't.
that way. Nope.
Yeah. So.
Well, that's a lot. There was fear, anxiety, and depression was this show.
Yeah, and phobias.
Yeah, and
Like
phobias.
phobias.
Too. So we covered a lot in this show.
Which
so
is perfect for Halloween.
we hope, yeah,
Yes.
exactly. So we hope that we have, taught you a little bit or informed you enough where now you're curious to find a little bit more. And if you have any questions for Kellee or I or the both of us, please go to our Facebook, right? Can
Right.
Yeah, Both Sides Now TV on Facebook.
on Facebook, you can, ask us questions there
Absolutely.
or on the station. And
We also have a Twitter at Both Sides Now TV as well.
Okay, go to our Twitter account and feel free to ask us any questions. Thank you for listening, and we
you.
will see you next week.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Both Sides Now, featuring the unconventional duo Dr. Shirley and Kellee White. Two perspectives, one world.